Hello, welcome to the Midwest in World Affairs 6th course. Today we will continue with Iraq and the political chaos in Iraq and ISIS we will talk about, which was a very actually contemporary topic. So the main argument is when we talk about the political chaos in Iraq is not a contemporary phenomenon because the Iraqi problem and the Iraq as a failed state, which I mentioned earlier, is just ignored by the international literature and international community, but it takes the attraction of the world media only after the emergence of radical Islamist group, which is Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. So before the ISIS, Iraq was already destroyed by the US and his allies, but somehow this fact have been ignored and it's only come to the agenda when the ISIS emerged in Iraq. So the basic argument is that when we analyze ISIS and when we analyze Iraq, we should not only focus on the terrorist-based aspect, but also we should focus on religious, cultural, economic, and identity-related variables in order to understand the emergence of the ISIS and the core of the problem. So again, when we look at the Iraq, we see that problematic state formation, artificial borders, legitimacy problem, and again, the paradox of Westphalian principles is the main reasons behind the emergence of the ISIS and collapse of the state regime in Iraq. So therefore, just focusing on ISIS terrorism as terrorism is something like focusing on mosquitoes without taking swamp into the consideration. So how the ISIS emerge? When we look at the ISIS, is first of all, it's Al-Qaeda related group, which is Al-Nusra Front under the Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. And in 2006, the group changed its name. And with the unification of other groups, first, it claims to be Islamic State in Iraq. And then later on, it's turned to be, Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, which is, a historical name for the Levant region. So I see in Syria, again, consolidated, and because of the Maliki wrong policies in Iraq, then disbanded Sunni militants started to join ISIS, and then ISIS became a very organized military force under the control of the experts, military experts, because as I said, Maliki has very Shia-oriented policies, and he basically dismissed the Sunni military forces within the army. So because of this, the generals, Saddam connected generals, ex-Sunni generals who had been dismissed from the Iraqi army, they also joined to ISIS because of the Maliki wrong and sectarian policies. And then, as I said, ISIS changed its name when it organized itself in Syria to the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, which is ISIL. And then they claim Islamic Caliphate because that Caliphate is, historically speaking, the highest Islamic rank within the Islamic world. But Ottoman Empire, who is the last owner of the Caliphate, they abandoned this seat. Actually, they dismissed this position by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. So after Atatürk, this let's say, position was empty, was vacant, but ISIS claimed that they have a new Islamic Caliphate under leadership of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. So when they claimed the leadership of the Islamic world, then later on they changed their name once again, and they simply named themselves as Daesh or Islamic State, which basically claiming that now, like, the world is not enough. Even Iraq and Syria is not enough, and they show their ambition beyond Iraq and Syria, and they start to talk about for the name of the whole Islam. So what was the strength of the ISIS? Let's talk about this a little bit. First of all, anti-Shia nature is an important factor of ISIS. Unfortunately, there's a religious schism in the Middle East, and it continues even up to date. There's a long story between Shiites and Sunnis, and ISIS very successfully used this hostility between these two sectarian groups in order to exploit the feelings of the Sunni population and this anti-Shiite nature and using of strong brutality against the Shia people strengthened ISIS, especially among the Sunni population. Secondly, as I mentioned, Iraq's corrupt and sectarian government and polarizing policies of ex-Prime Minister al-Maliki was the main reason behind the rise of ISIS, because, as I said, Maliki was favoring the Shia groups, and also he's trying to dismantle the Sunnis to the system. And because of this, many people of Saddam's era, like Saddam's generals, who are actually very secular people, they joined to ISIS because of this anti-Shia nature and struggle with the al-Maliki. Other point which is very neglected in international academia is agony since 1991 and sense of victimization. As I also mentioned earlier, sense of victimization is very strong within the Arab world, where people feel victimized by the outsiders, by the international system, by the outsider powers. So ISIS used this victimization in a very strong sense to gather supporters. Let me again remind you that during the US occupation between 1991 and 2003, 2 million Iraqis lost their life, and most of them of these people were just babies or children under 5, as I just mentioned, just because of absence of simple vaccine, that these people couldn't be treated and they lost their life because of their embargoes. So ISIS used this very effectively, and because we know that among the Sunni areas in particular, every family has lost their members, like even children or mothers or fathers. So under this occupation, which there's a strong sense of victimization and there's a strong anger, especially to the US, it become more easier for ISIS to collect members and support. Secondly, they exploit the radical Islamic ideology. Of course, I mean, when you look at the experts of Islam, they will 100% say this, you know, ISIS has nothing to do with the Islam, because Islam is not a religion of terror. Islam is not this identification. But unfortunately, many illiterate or the ordinary people who has not very well idea about the Islam, these people has been exploited by the ISIS radical Islamic ideology. The other thing is Israeli factor. Actually, there was a sense of rumors and even some claims that ISIS is founded by the Israel. I personally actually agree with this point, because at the end of the day, ISIS was serving for the Israeli interest. But on the other hand, Israelis harsh policies against the Palestinians, Israel's harsh policies to the regional countries, exploited by the ISIS to collect some supporters, in a sense that, Israel as a terror state in the world, and we will gonna fight with them, we will gonna stop them. So that was the Israeli factor, which again exploited by the ISIS to collect some supporters. The political chaos in Iraq and Syria, and both Iraq and Syria has very serious problem. Iraq was once a failed state, still struggling. Syria was, that there's a still ongoing war in Syria. So this political chaos in Syria and Iraq is also exploited by the ISIS. ISIS also have strong financial reserves, like contributions. There are many rich people who contribute to the ISIS. Taxes, from the lands they occupied, they were collecting taxes. Oil smuggling, which is actually ISIS was selling this oil that they smuggled from the oil-rich areas. And with this money that they gathered, of course, also, drug trafficking, kidnappings. So many income enable ISIS to pay new recruits and, organize itself. And then we know that other factor is that there are these so-called mujahids, which is Islamic fighters that they know nothing but fight. A group of people who started their campaign in Afghanistan, then they moved to Algeria. So wherever there's a so-called, what they are calling jihad and Islamic fight, these veteran fighters was always there. So ISIS able to get these veteran fighters, as I said, starting from the Afghan war. And as a result, we have a well-armed well-equipped military officers with captured weapons and the persons who know how to kill people. And because of these factors, finally the ISIS benefit from the abuses its enemies and mistakes of its enemies and suddenly become a major force in Iraq and in Syria. When we look at the weakness of ISIS, which eventually led to its collapse, first of all, they show enormous and abnormal actually brutality and barbarity, and because of this barbarity they made many enemies in the region. So when you look at the smaller ethnic groups like non-Sunni religious groups, Kurds, Yazidis, Alevites, Christians and others, because of ISIS extreme brutality and inhuman treatments to the people, naturally all the other groups are united against the ISIS. Secondly, ISIS alliance with the other Iraq Sunnite groups and Ba'athist and also some tribal leaders was temporary because, as I mentioned, they were together with ISIS because of the Maliki's wrong policies, because of the polarizing policies of al-Maliki. So we know that that's a very temporary alliance because these people are mainly secular people. They are against the radical Islam, and ISIS with radical Islamic ideology actually was not mixing well with these secular people. And as I said, it's formed an unholy alliance. So this is again my term, is unholy alliance, and it shows that Saddam's secular force at ISIS is not will not support ISIS in as they see the brutality of the ISIS, and this was exactly the case. ISIS started to lose its base in Iraq when especially it lost its Sunni base and secular Sunni base. And also, one of the reasons that why ISIS has been collapsed is they should able to find some collaborators, some alliances within the region. Of course, in parentheses, Israelis was their alliance, but that was not enough because ISIS become enemy with Iran, ISIS become enemy with Hezbollah, ISIS become enemy with Peshmergas, PKK, Assad forces, then later on USA, then the Sunni-led Arab states, even Al-Qaeda. But of course, as we all know, the ISIS make the biggest mistake by attacking the Turkish, making terrorist activity in Turkish soil, which was the end of the ISIS, because at the end of the day, Turkish forces who entered to Iraq and Syria completely dismantled ISIS from its ground. So what was the remedy? Because many think that when the military actions ended, that's that will provide a sustainable solution. But indeed, military actions cannot provide a sustainable solution. Without taking care of the problems in the region and just trying to sort out it by military means, by no way will sort out the problem. So first of all, Sunni regions must receive greater autonomy, and they should take enough funds by the central government, Shia-dominated government. Secondly, Sunni National Guards shall provide security in Sunni areas. So because of this conflict between Sunni and Shias, sectarian conflict, it's very natural that Sunni people are trusting more to Sunni security guards than Shia. So this security concern should be satisfied by the central Iraqi government. Also, yes, Iraq is now a Shia-dominated country, but Sunnis' representation at national institution in central government should be secured and should be supported. And also, we know that if Sunni people is marginalized from the system, then again, this time maybe not be ISIS. ISIS, it may have different name, but still, if you're trying to ignore the Sunni population, Sunni power in Iraq, it may also lead to further problems in the future. So, to sum up, we can say that nation model was compulsory model in the Arab world because we don't have another model. So if it is a model based on regional autonomy, like Kurdish dominated areas in the north, Shias in the south, and the Sunnis in the middle, maybe it will be better. But because of the absence of another respective model, we see that a complete authoritarianism in Iraq, and this success, so-called success, caused a lack of cohesion between the rulers and the people. And then we see that because of the failed state, there's a dual authority between the people and the state, where the state rulers not representing the will of the people. And when all these artificial state, artificial boundaries, coupled with wide corruption, bad governance, all this further fueled the situation. And we see that when the Sunnis expelled from the power, then that was lead Iraq to a failed state. So if we continue to analyze the problem with Western-oriented attempts, we see that, and leaving other aspects behind, we cannot find a solution to the contemporary problems. And we know that Sunnis should be given greater autonomy in their life, and analyzing ISIS with only Western lenses will not find a solution, but will create a problem. So all this problematic should be treated as one. It shouldn't be forget that Iraq has artificial boundaries. It shouldn't be forget that Iraq still have problems, and each sectarian group should be respected equally, and they should believe to represent themselves. So thank you for listening. We will continue with the next lecture.